Tonight in Democracy 20, the changing face of the workplace since 1994.
What we can also say is that people in a job, specifically in the formal sector, have seen very good salary increases above the rate of inflation.
And on this day 20 years ago, a brutal act of terrorism attempted in vain to derail the country's very first democratic elections. Good evening and welcome again to Democracy 20, our special pre-election show in which we celebrate 20 years of democracy in South Africa. In tonight's show, we take a look at jobs and specifically what has been done since 1994 to secure the interests of workers. We welcome your participation as usual in all our discussions right here on the show. You can do that by emailing us your views. elections@sabc.co.za is our email address. You can also send us your SMS text messages, this to 33726. Begin your SMS, remember this, the message must start with the word vote and every SMS will cost you around R1.50. For tweets, use the hashtag SABC elections. You can also find us on our Facebook page, which is SABC News Online. Send us your views, send us your comments. We've got special guests here for you tonight, so hopefully they'll be looking forward to hearing from you at home. Now, for our first story of the evening, since 1994, South Africa's economy has grown by at least 33%. This growth rate has translated into increased job creation, but not at the rate of the country's growth in the population and migration. During the past 20 years, the tripartite alliance comprising of the ANC, the SACP and COSATU has done much to secure the interests of workers, but the labour market continues to suffer from high unemployment rates and low educational outcomes.
Between 1994 and 2007, the South African economy steadily accelerated in growth due to the lifting of sanctions and the reintegration of the economy into the global economy. But South Africans have not enjoyed an equally fair share in this growth. The country's Gini coefficient, a measure representing the income distribution of a nation's residents, where 0 represents perfect equality and 1 total inequality, hovers between 0.6 and 0.7, ranking it one of the most unequal societies in the world. The higher economic strata of the population, mainly white, enjoyed the surpluses that came with the growth, while the black working class argues that it has still as yet to earn a living wage. Through union membership, workers have secured wage increases over the years.
What we can also say is that people in a job, specifically in the formal sector, have seen very good salary increases above the rate of inflation. Very often it's been off a small base, but it has increased the base significantly. And if we look at the formal sector gross salaries, then South Africans in that sector have fared very, very well.
But some argue that ordinary workers' pay has remained unchanged.
The fact is that for the most part of the last 20 years, the average wages increase has been below the growth in output per worker. So more and more value, so to speak, or more and more output or produce is produced per worker in the economy, but they don't get compensated. The real wages on the average doesn't grow at the same rate.
For many years, the tripartite alliance enjoyed a honeymoon season. But of late, dissenting voices within the alliance have questioned the ruling party's economic development strategies, arguing that they were more geared to furthering the interests of capital and not those of the common, previously disadvantaged black worker. The cracks in COSATU now see key affiliate NUMSA considering withdrawing from the federation to set up a workers' party that will be more sympathetic to the needs of workers.
Because of the assertion on the part of some within Labour that the labour market, or at least representatives, leaders of the union bodies, have become too ensconced in politics, too ensconced in the ANC. And so, if anything, there's now greater divisions between Labour and generally the ANC, to the extent that it has even given foundation for the rise of AMCU.
In recent years, AMCU made its mark, becoming the predominant union in the platinum mining sector, depriving COSATU affiliate, the National Union of Mine Workers, of its traditional strength in the sector. Collective bargaining has served as a key way to negotiate worker salaries, which AMCU appears to have rejected, preferring to negotiate separately with each employer. Beyond mining, there's a concern that collective bargaining may be under threat.
More recently, with the collective bargaining mechanism having been undermined, if anything, what it has done is probably contributed to greater fragmentation in terms of bodies, or at least the labour market representation. And what we see trending is a situation where there are smaller unions but more unions, and this is likely to weigh on the negotiating capabilities of firms. If anything, one can argue the labour market has become somewhat less stable and even maybe more militant in recent years.
But analysts are concerned that people are missing the bigger picture in the labour market, that of unemployment. Officially, it stands at 25%, but a broader definition takes that number to 40%. They argue that given the level of predominantly low skills in South Africa, those in employment should be happy to have a job.
The long-term unemployment rate in South Africa, in other words, people without a job for 3 or more years, is now in excess of 2/3 of the unemployed. And that is a very worrisome factor, because it says that people from the unemployed sector are not moving to the employed sector.
The high unemployment rate also creates a burden on those who are employed.
The amount of people that one worker has to support with one wage has increased. And of course, that is also undermining stability on the labor market. People get desperate because their wage has to support more and more people. So you have to have an increase of wages at the expense of profits.
Unions are engaged in a movement that could see the establishment of a workers' party, which would likely go head-to-head with political parties in future elections. Meanwhile, analysts of a less left-leaning persuasion argue that the solution to South Africa's labour market problems will come with greater educational outcomes across the population and laxer labour laws, easing the hiring and firing of workers. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And joining us now in studio is COSATU's spokesperson, Mr. Patrick Craven-Guinea. Mr. Craven, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Nice indeed to have you here. Listening to that package, we think 20 years later, we heard how South Africa's grown as an economy by 33% or so. But does it reflect this as a better country, so to speak, looking back?
Overall, definitely. Anyone who denies that generally we're better off than we were under apartheid, I think is suffering from a severe case of denialism and forgetting just how bad that system was, particularly as far as the workers are concerned, where they were little more than slaves in many ways, deprived of virtually all rights to protection from exploitation, abuse, unfair dismissal, paid incredibly low wages, and treated as almost subhuman. So obviously things are far better. We have laws in place that protect workers' rights. We have sectoral determinations which lay down minimum wages for the most vulnerable workers. And even for those who don't have jobs, there are now far, far more social benefits available, not to all unemployed workers, but to certain categories. So yes, but, and it's quite a big but, our main concern is that the main beneficiaries of those 20 years have been the employers, which may seem strange to say that the workers are better off, but the rich have got richer, much faster than the poor have got less poor. And so it's created an even bigger gap in wealth between the rich and poor than there was under apartheid. And that is something of extreme concern. And it's why I think there is so much unrest, both at the workplace, in strikes, and in communities, in the service delivery protests. It's not so much that people in absolute terms feel that they're worse off than they were. They're not. But compared to the standard of living of the very rich, and we're now the most unequal country in the entire world, they feel very, very angry, and justifiably so. And that, I think, is the big challenge we have in the next 20 years, although I hope it won't take 20 years, to start bringing that wage and wealth gap down drastically.
on level par, so to speak. I think then the question, you mentioned something, you mentioned the unrest, you mentioned the strikes that are currently going on. One in particular is the mining strike at the Platinum Belt right now. I mean, apparently talks, I just heard from my colleagues who work in the economics department saying even talks this afternoon, they broke down as well. Now, this is seriously hurting the country, isn't it?
It is, but we feel the main blame must rest with the employers. It's easy to forget that the mining companies were pillars of the apartheid system, and they benefited enormously from the migrant labor system, which enabled them to pay poverty wages, to provide incredibly bad accommodation for the workers to live in, with a huge rate of accidents and deaths, and people still suffering from all sorts of diseases which were directly related to their diseases, to their working conditions. They must take the responsibility for the fact that miners, quite rightly in our view, feel that they're grossly underpaid.
I think that's the question I was going to ask. Do we think that 12.5, for example, that miners are saying should be minimum wage, is it doable? Is it feasible?
We think it's entirely feasible. There are other countries where miners actually, mine workers, earn far more than that. Australia, Canada, and we certainly won't accept the argument because you can find other countries where workers are paid even less, that therefore we have to accept that that's reality. Workers should be paid for the value of the work which they put in. And in the case of the mining industry, it's enormous. Huge profits are being made. Even now, even during this strike, it hasn't stopped profits coming in. And so the workers are justified in that demand, although obviously there are questions which I don't want to go into as far as taxes and so on are concerned. But basically, yes, the workers have a good case, and not just in the mining industry, right across the spectrum, workers, we believe, are paid far less than the value of the wealth that they create.
We're running out of time, Mr. Craven, but I need to ask this one more question. Leading up to elections next week, obviously, do you think that things like these will play into the minds of the electorate, in particular, these people, the miners?
They will. Whether they'll actually have an effect on the voting figures is another question, because we can't say that, well, this is all the fault of the ANC government and therefore they will suffer, because a lot of workers, the majority of workers, still support the ANC, which is why COSATU has, ever since it came into existence, has been in an alliance with the ANC. But if you look at all the alternatives, then they really have no solution to these problems. What we require is, in fact, for the ANC to get re-elected and to start to carry out more seriously some of the policies which are already there on paper, but we believe are far too slow to roll out, to transform the economy and create sustainable, decent jobs for workers.
Mr. Patrick Craven, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us right here in Democracy20. Patrick Craven, spokesperson for COSATU, speaking to us here about our topic tonight. Well, basically, it is what it is. Thank you very much for joining us. Democracy20 takes a quick break. Don't go away. We've got more for you immediately after this. Job creation and stability, that's what we're talking about.
When a man's an empty kettle, he should be on his mettle, and yet I'm torn apart. Just because I'm presuming that I could be kinda human if I only had a heart. I'd be friends with the sparrows and the boy who shoots the arrows if I only had a heart.
The JSE, which didn't trade yesterday, opened quite strongly today and continued to trade in that fashion, almost as if it was playing catch-up.
I think that the markets have been primarily moved by the amount of liquidity which has consecutively been added or subtracted from the markets.
Ireland's official exit from its EU IMF bailout has restored national pride.
The path that has been followed for the past 3 years puts us in a position where we can now be optimistic for our country's future.
That's News at 1, daily at 1 p.m. on SABC News.
An earth tremor has hit parts of Johannesburg. No damage or injuries have been reported after a magnitude 4 tremor this morning. The tremor shook parts of Johannesburg just before 10 this morning. It has been described as quite a big guy.
The provisional epicenter that the Council for Geoscience has given is a few kilometers southwest of the University of Johannesburg.
Previously in 1999, a similar tremor was recorded measuring 5.7 in Valcom. Another event of this magnitude can be expected again within the next 3 weeks.
That's Primetime News, daily at 6 p.m. on SABC News.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back. You're still watching Democracy 20. Now, tonight we're talking about job creation and job security against the background of 20 years of democracy in South Africa. Just before we went to the ad break, we heard the views of COSATU. And joining me now is Babu Sandile Zungu Manzini, the Secretary General of the Black Business Council. Good evening, Babu Zungu, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tabisa.
Yeah. Let's start off right there. We heard what Mr. Craven said as far as COSATU is concerned. Where do you stand in this, in particular, from Black Business Council?
I think we agree with Patrick that where we are today is not even comparable to where we were 20 years ago. There is an obvious challenge that maybe we have not created sufficient jobs. There's so much dignity that goes with being employed, being able to provide for your family rather than going to queue for a social grant. We need to restore the dignity of the people.
Looking back, I mean, you mentioned 20 years. How's that relationship between business and labor transformed? Has it transformed at all?
Well, there is a good rapport between business in general and labor. I think we all respect Network as an appropriate forum where matters get discussed. The effectiveness of Network is a debate for another day. But we do respect that there's a platform offered for social dialogue on matters of employment, economy, and so on and so forth.
Because I think the question is, some would say that's the reason why we're having these, not necessarily strikes, but that's why we have, let's call it that, strikes, people marching, asking for a better wage, because maybe there's that gap in between where their views are not being heard or their complaints not being heard by business, as it were.
Well, business respects the views of labor. And business will always want to conduct themselves within the confines of the Labour Relations Act, which obviously grants the right to strike, but also which protects the rights of employers to not pay for people who are not in the employ or who are not working. Of course, I mean, if you look at the current strike in the Platinum Belt, business has suffered severely, so has labour.
Looking at that, is business getting enough support from government? Then that'd be the question.
We believe that government has played a very constructive role during times of crisis. If you looked at the Marikana situation, government called business, organized business, it called labor to sit around the table to come up with a program that will restore peace and justice in that area. We believe that the jury is out in terms of the commission of inquiry, but peace has been brought into that space. So we believe that government has played a constructive role. However, from business, we have what we believe is a valid concern, that maybe this thing called flexibility in the employment market is something that needs to be reviewed. Business, especially small business, would like to engage in employment during times when such employment is required, but be able to, for lack of a better word, offload when such situations demand. And the capacity of business to engage in such flexible employment practices, the lack thereof hampers the capacity of the small business sector to grow and to contribute to the economy as much as it should.
Now, we're thinking, speaking about how government has contributed, if any, in terms of that question, has business, on the other hand, created or done enough to create jobs or job opportunities?
We have argued from the Black Business Council that a forecast ministry on SMMEs and cooperatives needs to be created. We also believe the low-hanging fruit in terms of employment creation, sustainable basis, lies in the SMME sector. We believe the low-hanging fruit in terms of higher growth in the economy lies in the SMME sector. Even the National Development Plan envisages this. So a creation of a forecast ministry brings government closer to where we are as business. And of course, I mean, we can review in 10 years' time whether our accession will have taken the country in the positive direction. We are convinced it will.
I've got one more question to you before we run out of time. It's about the BRICS issue. Do you think SA's relationship with BRICS, well, what do you take? What is your take on South Africa's relationship within BRICS?
We are well entrenched within the BRICS group of nations, both politically, economically. South Africa as a whole envisages that the role we are playing creates leverage for them. So we are seen as not just a 50 million population market, we are perceived as a 1 billion market because the rest of the African continent considers us as authentic representatives. Very important as well, we have achieved certain gains by our membership of BRICS. We envisage that there will be creation of a BRICS Development Bank, which we expect to benefit the creation of infrastructure in the African continent.
Sandile Zungu, Secretary General of the Black Business Council, speaking to us right here on Democracy20, and a spokesperson, or rather Secretary General of the Black Business Council, the BBC, as he called it. Thank you very much for joining us on Democracy20.
Thank you for having me here.
Let's take, I think we've got a couple of social media messages. We're going to read one quickly out now before we go to a break. I think it's going to pop up on your screen. Yep, there it comes up. In fact, I'm going to look to my right-hand side. Oh, there it is. This one coming from Olani Ngwegazi saying, workers in this country are still not recognized for the role they play in our economy, looking at the platinum mine strike. And we just heard and spoke about it with Mr. Craven. That strike seems to be continuing as talks again failed early this afternoon. Anyway, we take a quick break. Coming up after the break, we'll look at this day in history, my favorite part, the haircuts in these shows. I tell you that. Stay tuned. We continue after this.
Your World provides trusted world, continent and local stories. We deliver breaking news from across the globe and information on the latest top stories on business, technology, politics and sport. Analysis of the big global business and economic issues as they affect consumers and investors. Make sure you don't miss Your World, weekdays between 11 and 12 midnight. We keep the nation fully informed.
The Swaziland Tourism Authority invited Kaleidoscope on a media tour of what has become known as the Little Switzerland of Africa, the Kingdom of Swaziland. The Mantanga Waterfall is one of Swaziland's best known and most accessible waterfalls, as it can be seen within 50 meters.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Zoom into Africa. This is Algeria. The president is Mr. Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Algeria got independent from France on 3 July 1914. The population is more than 36 million people. One of the major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit is dinar.
Welcome back. You're still watching Democracy20. Now, on this day 20 years ago, 9 people were killed and 92 injured, some of them quite critically. This in a car bomb explosion in central Johannesburg. Among those killed in the incident was ANC Johannesburg Secretary General Susan Keane. She was the 41st, in fact, she was 41st on the ANC's regional election list. The bomb went off on the corner of Bree and Von Villig streets just before 10 a.m. instantly killing a pavement fruit seller and causing extensive damage to the ANC's regional and national headquarters and surrounding buildings. The PAC's offices were also damaged. This report was broadcast on SABC News on the 24th of April in 1994.
The bomb weighed between 70 and 90 kilograms and completely destroyed the car it was in. Severe damage was done to surrounding cars and buildings. A burning car was flung into a shop. The windows of buildings up to 4 blocks from the scene were broken.
I was coming down from my store and I saw the bomb. I just saw smoke and noise and people running.
We were in a bedroom and the whole glass just fell on top of me. Yes. And so, and then as soon as we came out of the building and we came way downstairs.
About a block from the scene were damaged and Plain Street was flooded. Many pedestrians and motorists were injured by pieces of glass and shrapnel. A lot of these people never saw what hit them.
I don't remember anything, I'm afraid. I was driving next. The last thing I remember is deciding to turn left, and then I don't remember anything more.
4 blocks around the accident scene was cordoned off in a bid to keep curious onlookers away, while paramedics treated patients on the scene. Bystanders sang political songs and shouted slogans, making it difficult for security forces to do their job.
Please, ladies and gentlemen that gather here, please leave the scene.
The police posted a reward of 500,000 rand for information about the bombing.
I'd also like to appeal to anybody that has any information that can help the police in the investigation to please contact the investigating officer, who is Captain Terblanche, and his telephone number is 948-8103 up to 7.
The PAC accused the police of stopping them from treating the injured at the scene.
We were dragging people or some of them were already dead, and we were actually chased by the police away. So that, as far as I'm concerned, some of the people who were so seriously injured that I believe could later die in hospital would have been saved.
Police denied the allegations.
It is very strange that the PAC should make allegations like that and accuse the police of such actions, for starters. Because shortly after the blast took place, Mr. Benny Alexander of the PAC spoke to General Khalid, the regional commissioner of the police in the Witwatersrand, as well as Brigadier Zirk Gous, the head of public relations for the police in Witwatersrand. And he, in fact, expressed his satisfaction with the way the police handled the scene.
And PAC condemned the bombing. Tokyo Segwali, the ANC's premier candidate for the Pretoria-Witwatersrand Vereniging area, later asked people to remain calm.
We think that those responsible, wherever they are, should take note of the fact that you are fighting against too many people. You have launched a war against a whole nation. People will not be allowed to have their own civil war, and we call upon all South Africans to understand that all of us must join hands and make sure that the new democracy dawns in this country, so that we are not daunted. The election must proceed.
Tutu also appealed to people to refrain from conflict.
We will not panic, and as long as the security forces show that they are going to be effective in following up all of this kind of thing, we should be saying, quite obviously, there are those who want to subvert and sabotage the effort, and we mustn't allow them. First of all, we mustn't panic, and we must go along, because there isn't as much violence as they had hoped was going to be. And I just beg our people to remain calm.
Unfortunately, that's the end of the show for tonight and for the week. Democracy 20 will be back next Monday with more stories celebrating our democracy. Stay tuned for the English 7 o'clock news. Good night.